everyone who can't actually. Okay, so I'm going to get started, and then I can let people in as they turn up. So let me share my screen and hope that I'm sharing the right thing. Yes, I am. Hope everyone can see that. I think I'm going to have to keep it. Oh, maybe I won't have to. I was going to say I might have to keep it in that view so that I can let people in at the same time, so I don't have anyone else with me tonight. But maybe I won't. Let's try and see whether I can. It will still tell me that people need admitting. Yes, it does. So that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to get started. As we go through, I'm not going to be able to read the chat at the same time as talking because my multitasking is just not that good. But I will look at the chat afterwards, and if anyone has any burning questions, then feel free to ask. I am going to keep it to an hour tonight because it's just me and my daughter is not feeling very well. So I'm going to make sure that I get back to her in an hour. But oh, there's lots of people still joining. But let's get started, and we can talk about how to nurture your autistic young person. I've just realised that I haven't got a copy of my book next to me to show everyone, which is a bit silly, isn't it, when you're doing something to support your book that's just published today. There is one over there, but I won't get up and get one. We've got a slide at the end that will show you the cover of the book if you haven't seen it already. So who am I? My name's Cathy Wassell. I run Autistic Girls Network, which is a charity that supports autistic young people and their families, as well as autistic adults, obviously, as well. And we also campaign for earlier diagnosis or earlier recognition. Doesn't have to be diagnosis, but we campaign to get autism recognised earlier, particularly in primary school, so that young people don't have to go through the transition to secondary school without having been recognised as autistic and supported as autistic. I have 2 autistic young people myself, autistic and otherwise neurodivergent. We have a whole flavour range, if you like, in our family of neurodivergency. I'm neurodivergent myself. I'm also studying for a master's at the University of Birmingham in autism. I'm meant to be writing my dissertation at the moment, and I'm definitely not writing it, but that's how it goes, isn't it? Also, I'm not going to be talking about that specifically because most of it is not my story to tell. It's my daughter's. And maybe at some point in the future she might tell it, but it's not my story to tell. But we do have experience in our family with CAMS, with intensive support teams, with EHCPs and flex learning and specialist schools and all of that. So if you do want to ask any questions around those things, then that will be okay. So first of all, sorry, just admitting more people. First of all, why do we call ourselves Autistic Girls Network rather than ASD, for example? And we don't use the term ASD in Autistic Girls Network because autism is not a disorder. There is nothing disordered about autistic people. It's not an illness. It doesn't need a cure. It can't be treated, all of those things. We really want to get away from the medicalized, pathologized language around autism. And there have been lots of studies which showed that the majority of autistic people who took part in the studies preferred identity first language, which is autistic rather than person with autism. We also don't use functioning labels, and there's going to be a nice slide coming up which is going to show you why we don't use functioning labels. So I'm just going to move everyone's faces because I can't see the slides properly. So I have permission from the lovely Autism Sketches to use this slide. We don't actually use the term autism spectrum really in Autistic Girls Network either, but it's a nice explanation of kind of perhaps the misconceptions around the autism spectrum as a phrase. So the autism spectrum as such is not a linear spectrum. So you're not on one end or the other end of the spectrum. It's much more like the circles that you see underneath. And a lot of autistic people have what's called a spiky profile. So if you look at the circle on the right, some things, so in red, it's social differences is what she's written on the slide. Some things people are going to be very good at. Other things people are going to have more difficulties with, and each person is going to be different, just as we're all different, as humans. And so what you're looking at on the right is very much a spiky profile. You can see some things, the triangle is completely filled in. Other things, there's only a tiny bit filled in the triangle. And that's very much indicative of a spiky profile. Sorry if you can hear that, that's my dog. And as she says at the bottom, terms like high functioning and low functioning are outdated now. They're not useful. And the reason for that is, well, there are a few reasons for that, but low functioning in itself, who would want to be called low functioning anyway? And high functioning, there's also a problem with that term, because if someone is high functioning at some times, say for example, they went to school and they got plenty of GCSEs, for example, they may also have very, really real difficulties in communication or in socializing or in having really strong sensory sensitivities. And so they may not feel as if they are high functioning all of the time. And the problem with that term is that it often means that bodies such as schools don't give the right support to the person because they believe that they are high functioning. And so that's why it is a really kind of tricky way of looking at things. Also the term Asperger's is not diagnosed anymore, or it's not supposed to be diagnosed. It's not in the diagnostic manual and hasn't been for quite a few years now. There are also connotations with the actual person, Hans Asperger, who was involved with Nazis, and that is why a lot of people find that term quite difficult and outdated now. Right, my arrows have disappeared at the bottom here. There they are. So what does it mean to be autistic? Well, I mean, it's going to mean different things to different people. However, the most important thing to look at is that autistic people, we all vary widely. We all have different strengths, we all have different support needs, and that if you have an autistic young person in your house, then that's going to very much apply to them. And also those strengths and those support needs are going to vary at different times, on different days, in different months, in different years. And so it's any kind of support that's put in place needs to be very much tailored to the individual, as you would expect. Autistic people experience the world in a different way to non-autistic people, and this experience is at their very roots, at our very roots, I should say. You cannot remove autism from somebody. It's not a handbag, you can't pick it up and put it down, and therefore the way that autistic people experience the world is just part of them. I can't explain it more than that, really. And it means that they, sorry if you can hear my dog, it means that if you don't experience the world that way, you need to open your mind to difference. You need to open your mind to the idea that the way that you have been brought up, the ideas that have been that are in your psyche as this is the right way to do things, you need to open your mind to the idea that there are different ways of doing things and they're equally right. For autistic people, sensory feelings may be felt much, much more deeply than neurotypical people, non-autistic people. And this is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's if you have, for example, misophonia or hyperacusis, which is a very, very intense sensory sensitivity to noise, then that's not necessarily a good thing, because it means that it can be painful. Sound can be painful. However, if you have a real connection with nature and you can experience, I don't know, so let's say a field of flowers, and you can really, really experience the smell of those flowers and the beauty of how those flowers look, then that's a great thing. So, you know, there are strengths and there are difficulties in both. So when you are thinking about your young person and nurturing your young person, it's really important to kind of get away from this medical model of autism that, you know, that you will have been unable to avoid, because we're all unable to avoid it, when your young person was diagnosed, or maybe they haven't been diagnosed yet, but when they are diagnosed, unfortunately, it's likely to be very much based on a medical model. You may get a report with it that uses a lot of medical jargon, that talks about deficits, for example. We need to get away from that. There is a model of happiness for autistic people. We just don't really know what it is yet, because there hasn't been research done on that. There hasn't been acknowledgement from the professional world, if you like. I'm not singling out any individual professionals, because there are some that are brilliant and do really understand it and do try to work on a strengths-based perspective. But there hasn't really been an acknowledgement that it's possible for autistic people to be happy, to be fulfilled, to be confident. And that is perfectly possible. We just need to find our way to that model. So thinking about your young person, what are their strengths? What are they really interested in? What do they love? What is great about them? Something which might come up more than once is at the bottom, this idea of social justice, because this is something that comes up again and again and again with autistic and neurodivergent people. It's not a coincidence that Greta Thunberg, for example, is autistic and also is like the world leading climate warrior, if you like. It's very much something that comes up a lot, and you might find that your autistic young person is has a really, really strong sense of social justice, sticks up for the underdog. It might be something, you know, it might not be the same thing that they're interested in. It might not be climate, it might be feminism, it might be ableism, it might be Black Lives Matter, it could be anything, but it's very possible that they might be intensely interested in making things better. And we need people like that in the world, so that's brilliant. Looking at the ideas of monotropism. Monotropism in this sense is we're talking about special interests. I don't really like the term special interest because it seems to have been turned into something negative by people. And I mean, I don't think it is something negative, but I use the term passionate interest because that just doesn't seem to have the same connotations. When I say special interest has been turned into something negative, think about people, there may be people in your family who are really, really passionate about football, soccer, if you're not in the UK. There are loads of people in this country who are really passionate about football, really talk about not much else than football. But we don't say that that's their special interest, do we? We just accept it. And that's what we should be doing. No matter what your young person's passionate interest is, it might be Pokemon, it might be caterpillars, it might be the stereotypical trains, it could be anything, but to them it's the most fantastic thing. And working with their passionate interests, not trying to pull them out of their passionate interests, is what's going to help work with them, what's going to help nurture them, basically. And why is it really important that your young person is recognised as autistic? And when I say recognise, I don't necessarily mean diagnosis, although unfortunately we know that a diagnosis does make some things easier. It does make support easier to get. It does make benefits easier to get, for example. However, recognition is enough. diagnosis is enough as far as Autistic Girls Network is concerned. Now, not knowing that you are autistic can mean that you feel broken. It can mean that you feel different. You probably will have realized, almost certainly will have realized, that you are quite different to your peers. And it's there was research done, it was done on young people with ADHD, but I bet there would be similar results for autistic young people, and in any case up to 80% of autistic young people also have ADHD. There was research done which showed that ADHDers heard 20,000 negative points about them, or negative remarks, by the age of 10. 20,000 more than their peers. And so when we think about those messages that we're sending to neurodivergent young people, it's really, really important that we do work on this strengths basis. And if you are receiving those messages, but you don't actually know that you're autistic or ADHD, for example, then having that label, which is very much in inverted commas using that, because I don't believe that it's a label, having that label leads to other labels. It leads to people saying things like, you're weird, you're stupid, you're lazy. All of those things have been said. They may have been said about your young person. Of course, none of them are true, but they have been said. And we are going to briefly look at masking. Masking is kind of camouflaging your autism. It's not necessarily the best word because it implies that it's a choice. It implies that it's a conscious effort to do that. And half the time it's not conscious at all. It's totally unconscious. And autistic girls, for example, tend to do it from an early age. So maybe it's not the best term, but it's the most well-known term. So it's what I'm using here. Masking can lead to mental health issues and frequently does. There are many people in our Facebook group, which now has, I think, 12,500 people in it, and their child has been having serious mental health issues. And there are many reasons for it, but masking, because of the stigma of being autistic, masking is one of them. If you're not recognised, then you're never going to have your needs properly met. So that's a really big issue. You can also find your people. You can find other people who experience the world in the same way as you, and that you can't put a price on that. That's invaluable. And you can also be kind to yourself, because you're not a broken neurotypical person. And there's a reason why, if you've been struggling with something, there's a reason why that's happening. And it's probably because you're not having your needs met and you're not having support put in place. It kind of needs saying that statistically, outcomes for autistic adults are poor. But there are probably millions of autistic adults across the world who have not been diagnosed autistic in any kind of national health service, whatever that might be. They may have been diagnosed privately, but that doesn't mean that they're in the statistics. They won't be. And they may very well be undiagnosed or self-diagnosed, which means they don't appear in any of those statistics. But they may well have been employed, happily married, had children, and although they may have support needs, almost certainly will have some kind of support needs, and they will have put in strategies themselves to cope, they are not appearing in the dire statistics about employment, etc., that we see for autistic adults. But we've got no model of autistic happiness. We don't have anything to measure. We use measurements, but they're measures of neurotypical happiness, and autistic happiness might look quite different to that. For a start, it's likely to have different measurements according to socializing, for example, or according to communicating, for example, because autistic communication is different. So we really need to have more of a model of what autistic happiness looks like before we can make judgments like that. And of course, happiness looks different for different people. And what is the model of autistic happiness for your autistic young person might look different to what is the model of happiness for mine, for example. But any kind of increased recognition is going to mean increased understanding, and that's going to mean increased support and reasonable adjustments. I hope it will. But I think it will. And if we look back, although it feels like things are moving very slowly and certainly not moving fast enough, if we look back over the last 10 years, there has been a huge change and progress, real strong progress has been made. So I am optimistic about the next 10 years, although I don't want to be waiting 10 years for anything. And I hope that within 10 years, there's no need for Autistic Girls Network to exist at all. So let's look very quickly. I need to keep an eye on the time because I'm probably going on far too much. Let's look at what you need to know as a parent, if you're a parent of an autistic young person. What do you need to know about possible physical traits that they have that perhaps they haven't been able to articulate yet, and that you haven't realized that they have yet? So there's things like hyperacusis and misophonia, and that's the noise sensitivity that we were talking about. This can be really, really painful. So things like not being able to sit at the table because you can hear people eating, things like that really need taking seriously because they can cause pain. And so, for example, in our house, we gave up, I don't know, a long time ago, eating at the table. I don't know quite how we're going to manage Christmas Day this year. But my daughter can't stand the sound of my husband eating. He's autistic and he does eat quite loudly, I have to say. But it's something that is really, really difficult for her. Her sensory needs are very strong. And so we need to make reasonable adjustments in the home, just as a school or a university or a place of work would need to do as well. And for us, that means they don't eat in the same room, or she has noise cancelling headphones, or whatever it might be. And there's going to be other sensory needs. There may be needs relating to smell or to touch, or to very many different things. For my daughter particularly, clothes are a real strong issue. She has very few clothes that she can wear. For my son, completely different. Couldn't care less really what he wears, within reason, but mostly couldn't care less. Doesn't have those kind of sensory needs. So even within the same family, sensory needs are going to differ massively. Your young person may very well have difficulty with temperature regulation, so may not be able to differentiate between extreme heat and extreme cold. And you probably have noticed this. They may want to wear a coat all the time, or they may want to never wear a coat, or they may want to wear a coat in the summer but not in the winter. Those things happen too. And so being aware of this and being understanding about it is really, really important, because although of course you don't want your child to, get frostbite or anything, unless there is a real safety issue, they should be allowed to do whatever is comfortable for them, because the alternative is really, really uncomfortable, possibly to the point of pain. And if you don't experience the world that way, that's difficult to understand, I know, but sensory needs need to be taken very seriously. Light sensitivity. A lot of autistic people are very sensitive to light, to the point of sometimes needing to wear sunglasses. So that's also something that needs to be taken seriously. I've got a light on here because it's very dark in my room, and it's actually really, really annoying me, and I might turn it away a bit more. But that's something that needs to be taken seriously, and also possibly battling with school for some kind of reasonable adjustment as well about lighting. Sleep issues, of course, are very common, and there are actual physical reasons for this in the way that the body produces serotonin, which leads to melatonin production. Many autistic people cannot produce enough melatonin. And of course, in this country, in the UK, melatonin is actually quite difficult to get, whereas in other countries you can buy it over the counter. I don't know the reasons for that. But if you can get hold of melatonin, it is worth a try. Doesn't work for everybody. has worked quite well for us, I have to say. For the last 5 years, has worked quite well for us. So that is something to think about. But again, blue lights also can cause issues, and we know that very, very many neurodivergent children need their screens to self-regulate, and that's going to be particularly important in the evening, because often if you have intrusive thoughts, etc., they tend to be worse in the evening. So if you do need a screen to help you emotionally regulate, then it's not just as simple as turn off all screens 2 hours before bedtime, etc. But getting some kind of filter for your screen, for the iPad, whatever it might be, or getting blue light glasses can help. Now, the next thing hang on, I need to let some people in. 2 more things. The 2 next things, which are really, really important, are interoception and alexithymia. Now, interoception is how you feel sensations in your body. So, for example, we talked about temperature regulation. So you may have difficulty knowing whether you're too cold or knowing whether you're too hot. Think about sensations in your tummy, for example. There are lots of sensations that we feel in our tummy, and they mean different things. So we might be excited and we say that we feel butterflies in your tummy, which is actually a terrible thing to say to somebody that takes things very literally, because of course we don't actually have butterflies in our tummy. So that means that you're excited. We might feel a bit scared, and we feel that in our tummy. We might obviously feel hungry, or we might feel like we've got a slightly dodgy tummy and we don't actually feel very well. But you might also be thinking that you're having a heart attack or something. That's also felt in that kind of general area. And if you can't distinguish between those, if your brain is not getting the signals from your nerve receptors, if it's not sending the right signals and your brain is not getting that information, then it's actually quite scary, because you don't know what's going on. You can't identify what's going on. And those are interoceptive issues, which are quite common in autistic people. And then the other thing is alexithymia. And this is how to identify and express emotions. And the two are often connected. You don't have to be autistic to be alexithymic. However, over half of autistic people do have difficulties with alexithymia. And that means that they, as I said, can't identify the emotion that they're feeling, but also can't use the right words to express it. And so if you ask your young person how you're feeling, or other words, to the same effect, that's going to be a very, very difficult question to answer for somebody who is alexithymic. And so we need to think of, well, there's 2 things we need to be doing. We need to be understanding if they're alexithymic, and we also need to be trying to give them ways to express themselves and ways to be able to identify what's happening. And that's a long-term process. That's not a short-term process. And I can't, unfortunately, cover that in this session. And sorry, I've now forgotten what I was saying. And it's really difficult if you ask somebody that question and they can't reply to it. So we need to be thinking of different ways to ask that question, pointing out different things, maybe going in at a more granular level and asking much more specific questions that they may be able to identify. And then moving on to eye contact, I hope that most of you know already that eye contact is not necessary in order to concentrate. If you are in a classroom, for example, and the teacher forces you to make eye contact with them, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to focus on what that teacher is saying. You're certainly not going to be able to focus on what they're saying and write notes about it while you're looking at them. And so it's actually a pointless exercise in asking an autistic person to to make eye contact with you, because it won't fulfill the thing that you want it to fulfill, which is to focus on you, to concentrate on you. And the same goes with fidgeting as well. If you are autistic or ADHD and you need to fidget, for example, I am constantly twiddling my pen here, but you can't see it. Asking me to stop doing that and listen to what you're saying means that all I can do is focus on not twiddling the pen. Okay, with the pen it's easier because I can just put it down. I can't put my eyes down, but still the idea is the same. I will have to focus so hard on not doing what you've told me to not do that I won't be able to pay attention to what you're saying, and that's the issue. And if you have in the past told your child to look at me while I'm talking to you, you need to forgive yourself for that. You need to apologize to your child, and you need to move on and make sure that it doesn't happen anymore and nobody else does it to them, because it's not possible. It can be painful to make eye contact as an autistic person. And then the other issues, which again are much bigger than I'm able to really cover here, but they're covered a lot more in the book, is there may well be strong executive function issues, and this can manifest very differently in different people. So it may be a real organization thing where someone is absolutely unable to even get started on a project that you've told them about, for example, because they can't chunk it down into the actions needed for that project. Or it may be something else. It may be something else that they can't do. So you may find that they are very strong in some areas and have real support needs in other areas, and that's something that's going to be very individual. But this idea of executive function is something that may really need support with them, and it may need breaking down and using apps to break it down. For example, apps to remind people. There's lots of things that can be done, but it's important that it's recognized in the first place so that support can be put into place. And there's also things like face blindness. My husband is almost completely face blind, can't recognize the Queen, for example. I mean, obviously she's not around anymore, but couldn't recognize the Queen. Recognized her by her hair, her dress, her glasses, the way she stood, for example, with her handbag on her arm and things like that. But doesn't recognize her face at all, even though it's on stamps and pound notes. And then another thing is time blindness. It also happens a lot for ADHD. So this idea that somebody's always late, for example, may be because they are time blind. So although they know they have to be somewhere at 1 o'clock, let's say, they also think that they've got time to do a particular task before they leave. But actually, they have not specified accurately the time that it would take them to do that task, and then they get sucked into the task. They're trying to do the task and they lose track of time. Happens to me all the time. I quite often only realize that I'm supposed to be in a meeting 5 minutes after it's already started. And there are other possible coping strategies. Masking is one of them, and that is camouflaging your behavior, looking at what your peers do and really trying to fit in with your peers, basically. There's stimming, and stimming can be completely different for different people. But it tends to be a repetitive behavior. So stereotypical stimming would be flapping your hands, but a lot of your autistic young people probably don't do that, or perhaps only do it when they're really distressed or really stressed, I should say. So it could be anything. Could be singing the same song. It could be walking up and down the garden. It's lots and lots of things that it could be. It's just basically it's a repetitive behavior. Passionate interests and kind of really immersing yourself in passionate interests is a good coping strategy. It's something that makes autistic people happy to spend time in their passionate interests. And so there's nothing more relaxing and chilling than being able to immerse yourself in a passionate interest, as long as someone's not going to come and pull you out of it suddenly. And forms of stress regulation. And this, again, this is going to be different for different people, but it involves figuring out what your triggers are and what really, you know, doesn't help you, and then figuring out what things you like, and what makes things better for you and what does help you. So, for example, a trigger for my daughter might be noise of people eating. And for her to be able to regulate that using noise cancelling headphones would help. For her, pacing outside, along the patio and around the side of our house. She does that multiple times a day. So that helps her. Particular smells help her. So the smell of fresh washing helps her. And luckily for us, there was a Yankee candle that's called, I think it's called Fresh Linen, something like that. That helps her. So, and she can buy a little one and keep it in her school bag, as it was at the time. She doesn't go to school. She hasn't gone to school for a long time. But that helped her as well, to be able to smell that. I'm not going to go over this because we've talked about autistic masking, but it does can result in mental ill health. Girls tend to be pretty good at it, and that's not necessarily a good thing. My daughter was a absolute master masker until she couldn't anymore, until it all broke down. Tends to go hand in hand with situational mutism. You may have heard the term selective mutism. I don't like that term because it implies that there's some kind of choice involved. There's no choice in this. It's mutism that's caused by, very much by, anxiety and not feeling safe. So there's no choice in it at all. So, which is why I prefer the term situational mutism. And it might happen at school. If school is a place that they don't feel safe, might happen at the shops, might happen at the doctors, for example, or at the hospital. All kinds of places where, you know, it doesn't feel safe to speak. It's going to lead to a lot more anxiety-led school absence. There's lots of different names for that. Emotionally based school avoidance is one of them. But again, avoidance makes it sound like a choice to me. And it's not emotional, it's completely led by anxiety and not feeling safe. So I prefer this term. A lot of sensory sensitivity involved, but also things are going to change according to the environment that your young person is in and according to the people that are around them. So all of this can be quite complex, and what may be manageable one day may not be manageable another day if anxiety is too high, for example. And masking is absolutely a survival technique. Survival because you want to feel like you are normal, in inverted commas. You want to fit in with your friends. You don't want to look and seem different. You don't want to stand out. You want to avoid the stigma of being autistic, because unfortunately there is still very much stigma, although, you know, we hope that that's changing. And you want to avoid negative attention. Unfortunately, one of the statistics for autistic young people is very high rates of bullying, and autistic young people do tend to be bullied more than their peers. So of course it's completely understandable that that would want to be avoided. So how do you spot it? Well, if the school says that they are fine in school but they explode once they get home, that's a definite giveaway. It means they are very much not fine in school. And if you're in that Facebook group, you know why it's called that. Situational mutism would definitely be a flag for it. Being very quiet in class, not putting your hand up, not wanting to be called upon to speak, not speaking out, that would be a flag for it. It's not really a flag for masking, but a flag for an internal presentation of autism would be a dislike of PE, for example, because PE can be quite a difficult lesson, or can be chaotic because you don't know what's going to happen. Can be lots of people running around, of course, because it's sport. If it's a team game, it can be quite distressing to have to socialize and work with people that you don't know, that aren't your friends. You have to get changed. So there's the sensory aspect, the transition aspect of that. Getting changed in front of other people can be quite distressing. there's a high co-occurrence of dyspraxia, so it's likely that kind of ball sports are going to be quite difficult. In fact, my daughter, who we found out was dyspraxic, was always terrified of balls from an early age. And something like dodgeball, for example, is like torture because you have balls thrown at you. It's a pretty weird game, let's face it. I could probably talk all night about the fight, flight, freeze, fawn trauma responses, and everyone knows about fight and flight, of course, and those two would turn up in a more external presentation of autism or in a very distressed and crisis presentation of autism, whereas the last two tend to turn up in a more internal presentation of autism. So freeze would be shutting down, not being able to process anymore, probably a bit of situational mutism, for example. Fawning, on the other hand, is saying and doing what you think people want you to do. And so that is masking to a certain extent. But fawning is, you can imagine, fawning is not, it is a trauma response, but it's not a good one. It's not something that's good. Someone just doing blindly what you want them to do, even when it's not something that they want to do, is not a good thing. It's not a good thing for them. Might be a good thing for you, but it's not a good thing for them. There's a tendency to take the emo goth route, shall we say, to dress a lot in black, maybe have piercings, maybe have coloured hair, maybe have tattoos, depending on age. Dislike of working collaboratively, so working in groups just as much as team sports can be quite difficult. Friendships can be intense. And I think there's a lot of reasons for this, but some of the reasons are that friendships are really, really important to the autistic young person. And when things don't seem to be going right, that's really distressing. And so, you know, there is that intense basis to some friendships. And also recognizing and managing conflict can be difficult. And this is something that as you want to nurture your autistic young person, this is a good thing to teach if you're able to. And again, it's not something that's going to be solved overnight, but being we are going to come up against conflict in our lives, not necessarily directly against us, but it's something that we're going to see and we're going to experience. So being able to recognize that it's happening and being able to manage it without being over distressed is something that's quite an important life skill, I think. And I think it's really important that we let our autistic young people embrace their autistic identity as and when they're comfortable to be able to do so. So we know that it can be difficult feeling different as a tween or a teen. We don't want to stick out at that age. We don't want to look different in class. We don't always want that extra support that is written into our EHCP, for example. Because it makes us feel different. And so it's a difficult balancing act, that. We also need to get needs met, though. So, you've got to have that balancing act, and you've got to think about things like stimming. It's great if somebody feels able to stim in front of people, but that often is difficult for teenagers who want to fit in, who don't want to look different. So finding ways to fulfill the need let's think about one particular stim that your autistic young person has, and if it's too visible that they don't feel able to do it, is there a way that you can fulfill that need that the stim fulfills in a different way, in a perhaps less visible way? Thinking about things like that and working out and negotiating things like that can help. And then managing their day, how to help them to manage their day in terms of energy accounting. And energy accounting was a term that was coined by an autistic young woman called Maya, who then worked with Tony Attwood and came up with solutions for it. And we're just going to have a quick look at that, and then I'm probably going to stop and see if anyone's got any questions, because what's the time? Oh, it's nearly 10:02. I always do this, I talk for too long, sorry. So the idea of energy accounting, now I'm thinking of it as a bank account. I think originally Maya thought of it as a battery, charging and discharging a battery. So it doesn't matter whichever way helps you to look at it. But for this, we're going to look at it as a bank account. So if you think about a bank account, you've got two columns. You've got your deposits and you've got your withdrawals. And if they don't balance out, then you go overdrawn, you go into the red. So what we're going to be thinking about now is, for your young person, what is a withdrawal? What makes them lose energy? And what is a deposit? What helps them to gain more energy, whether that's physical energy or emotional energy? So things that they find difficult and things that help them, basically. And that's going to be different for every autistic young person. There'll be different entries in your bank account, in your energy bank account. So possible examples, and again, these are only possibilities. There's going to be loads more that are possible that aren't written down here. So things like things that are going to be difficult, things that help, that make them withdraw from their energy bank account. Socializing, so peopling, basically, I call it. That's going to be exhausting. So definitely that. Changes in routine. The school day in itself is exhausting. Sensory stuff, if you've got you know, stuff like people having to listen in the school dinner hall, the smells, the sound, people, all those people next to you in the school corridors, all of that, that's exhausting. Any kind of conflict or being corrected, especially if you're demand avoidant, that's going to be exhausting. Sorry, sensory is in there again, it shouldn't be. Autistic people are often intensely empathetic. This myth that autistic people have no empathy is rubbish. So feeling other people's emotions and being empathetic for them can be exhausting if they're really strong emotions. Any kind of injustice, we've talked about being a social justice warrior. Injustice can be exhausting, and being indignant about it can be exhausting. Unstructured time can be very difficult. So at the moment, even though college is difficult for my daughter, she hates the Christmas holidays. She hates them. She wants to go back to college because it's all unstructured time. No matter how we try to put things in each day and we make sure that, you know, they're written down and they're visible, she doesn't like it. So unstructured time is definitely a withdrawal for her. Might not be for your young person. Masking, we've talked about, is exhausting. Feeling excluded from your social group is exhausting. Multitasking, depending on what your executive function is like, multitasking can be exhausting. And any kind of cognitive overload would be definitely a withdrawal from your energy bank account. And then let's look at what your deposits might be. And again, this is going to be massively different for every autistic young person. So passionate interests, we've talked about that, and being able to talk about them with you is also going to be a deposit in their energy bank account. Predictability and structure and being able to make your own choices and having autonomy, that's a good thing. Being consistent and having promises kept, nothing worse than broken promise to break trust. So yeah, that thing. Having some alone time, some chill time, maybe lying on your bed in a dark room and listening to music, all of that is going to help. Whatever stimming activity you like, stimming is really comforting for autistic people, so that's good. Having the kind of sensory input that's good, like we talked about, music, listening to music on your headphones or nature or whatever it might be for you, that's good. Having proprioceptive input, and that's things like swinging on a swing or driving in a car, something that moves your body and gives you that proprioceptive input. Proprioception is one of our senses. And also other things can be things like a weighted blanket or lifting heavy bags or things like that. They can all help. My daughter, for example, she doesn't have to do it quite so much now, but really for 4 years, we've taken her for a drive every single night before she goes to bed. It really helps her. Animals can be amazing for having your energy bank account put lots of deposits in. So we have dogs, but for other people it might be cats, might be anything, but animals can be really good. And easier said than done, but having plenty of sleep, having enough sleep, and having chill time built into your routine, and we're going to talk about that routine in a minute, that can help. And also favorite TV shows or films or music or games, watching or playing them over and over again, they can all help because they're very comforting, they're very familiar. So those are the deposits. Right, let's go back, because I do want to talk about this kind of routine, because what it can really help to do is think about, let's just think about a week, and obviously this week is particularly different, so we might not want to think about this week, but anyway, think about any week in a given time, and think about what your autistic young person has to do in that week. What things are going to be withdrawals, and how much energy is that going to take? How much of a withdrawal is it going to be in their bank account? What can they put in? What can they deposit to build that energy back up again? So if they're going to have to go to school, for example, what can they do after school to put in some deposits back into their energy bank account? If they've got a day of socializing and they have to go to, I don't know, a family event or something, what can they do? Can they have some alone time at that event? Can they have some time where they're just chilling in the car, listening to music? You know, whatever it might be, try to work out over a whole week how you can balance the energy, and that's going to really help. Right, I think I'm going to need to not worry about these next slides because we don't really have time. But I do want to say, if you are neurotypical, if you're not autistic yourself, the most important way that you can help your young person at the moment is to make sure that you realize there's not only one right way of doing things. So I do see posts in Facebook groups sometimes where I think, you're not completely on their wavelength yet, are you, about the parent and the young person? And it's because it can be very difficult. In a way, you have to kind of break out of social norms. You have to break that social barrier. You have to not worry about the rules of society, because a lot of those, they're really not appropriate for autistic people. And being embarrassed about them or really worrying about those social rules being broken is not going to help your relationship with your autistic young person. So if, for example, you can't go and see great Auntie Agatha because your young person just can't cope with the idea of 10 people in a room, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And find ways to support your young person to not have to do that, or to be able to do it in a way that's good for them, whatever works for them, because they may want to go but may just not be able to. But this is really important. Autistic communication is perfectly valid. Autistic socializing is perfectly valid. And it really helps if both sides open their minds to, you have a different neurotype, you have a different way of experiencing the world, but it is perfectly possible to live happily together as long as you both accommodate each other and understand each other. And autistic people have had to accommodate neurotypical people for a very, very long time, and have had to fit in with a neurotypical society for a very, very long time. And it's time that they were accommodated and that they were understood, and that changes are made to the social rules so that they are more neurodivergent friendly. Right, I'm going to leave it there. So you may find it helpful, if you haven't already, you may find it helpful to read our white paper, which is called Autism, Girls and Keeping It All Inside. It's very much not all about girls. It's about an internal presentation of autism, which tends to be more common in girls, but not only girls at all. So you can read it there. It's freely available on our website. And the reason that I'm talking to you tonight is because my book was published today. It's all very, very exciting and then frankly a bit weird. So that's available, well, wherever you buy books, really. That's available there. So I'm going to stop sharing somehow. and I will look at the chat and see if there's any questions. Yes, I'm recording this, so it will be available to watch later. I'm going backwards. Yes, so they're about eye contact being painful. Yeah, definitely. Affects different people in different ways. Oh, Pookie, thank you for saying you'd helped admin. That would have been lovely. But I didn't see your message. I'm sorry. So if anyone has a question, do feel free to put it in. We've only got a couple of minutes, but that's okay. Where can you view it again? I will record it and I will put it on our YouTube channel, on Autistic Girls Network YouTube channel. How do you support a child who wants to just be normal? Well, your normal is your normal, isn't it? There are very many ways to be normal, and I suspect at the moment this might be a new realization for your child that they're autistic, and I promise you it will get easier and they will come to terms with it and they will start to be able to advocate for themselves. But at the time, I know that it feels very difficult because they don't want to be different and they don't want to appear different, and that's perfectly understandable. Normal teenage reaction, if they're a teenager, normal young person reaction, absolutely. You know, not anything unexpected there. But I think it's really, really important to teach about neurodiversity. Neurodiversity meaning all of us, all our different brains being diverse in the same way that biodiversity is the diversity of plant life. And I wish that we taught it in schools more. And we do actually have a training for schools on whole school neurodiversity. So maybe schools will start looking into that soon. But, you know, if we taught about neurodiversity, then there wouldn't be any such thing as neurotypical being normal. Neurotypical is the majority, but it's not normal. There are very, very, very many neurodivergent people in this world, absolutely millions of neurodivergent people. The rate for the prevalence rate for autism in Northern Ireland, for example, is 1 in 22. In this country, we say it's 1 in 100, but that's rubbish. It's not true at all. But, you know, there are likely many, many more autistic people than are recorded in statistics because of all the missing autistic adults. And so I would suggest to your young person that normal is a term that's going to be changing for them and is going to be changing for all of us, hopefully. Perhaps what they want is to be able to fit in, isn't it? That's what they want. And so it's difficult because I don't want to tell them to mask, because that's not helpful for their mental health. But I think if they've got some good friends, then hopefully they will be able to tell them little pieces. Maybe they don't want to say that they're autistic, but what they can do is they can say, I find these things difficult, and if you did this, or if you let me do this, that would be helpful for me. And good friends are going to be able to cope with that and are going to be able to support with that. So I would say that's how you start, and then gradually the idea of normal will change, and the idea that you can't possibly stand out and be different will change, and things will get a bit easier then. That's what I would say. How would you suggest accessing mental health support for someone with situational mutism? Well, I'm going to be honest with you and say that you're very, very unlikely to pass the threshold for CAMHS help if it's only situational mutism. And when I say only, obviously situational mutism is distressing. It's distressing to have got to that point where you don't feel safe. And so the main thing is not to force anyone to speak, to support them. And because situational mutism has happened because they don't feel safe, the most important thing is changing their environment so that they start to feel safe. And this is difficult in school because it's not something that's under your control, but you can start to educate school staff so that they can start to put things in place to make the environment feel safer. And things like at school, having well, hopefully more than one person, but at least one person who they feel safe with, who they are able to talk to, who they feel that they understand them. That's a good start. But don't let anybody force them to talk. Don't let anybody, you know, kind of make them feel like this isn't something that can happen in school. It absolutely can, and it's absolutely something that can be supported. Anila, I can see that you've got your hand up. Would you like to say something?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And I would say that is amazing. But I have a question. Actually, I'm an ND therapist. I am neurodivergent person, so I'm actually autistic. I don't know to answer this question because I find it difficult to, because when we say that masking is a painful thing, and we all know that it is very difficult to do that, and it's not our choice. We are not doing a lot of things by choice. But if I would like to unmask myself, or I would like to, you know, if I have to give a suggestion to one of my girl which I'm working with, how can I ask them to unmask? Because the question they're asking, sometimes I don't have answer for those questions, because she's so much right in such circumstances. And what could we possibly say to them, that where you need to go for? Because I find it difficult to unmask myself, and I put a lot of effort in becoming a therapist, you could say, to be perfect, perfect according to society, which is my anti society. Now whenever I study anything, all data I find, it is all anti research, it's not anti research. And sometimes I start feeling, okay, you lie down 3 and 4 things, do be mindful, work on your executive functions. For example, they would say that, okay, do exercise, eat good, sleep well. We cannot do those things. We have so many problems over there, and you start questioning yourself. Okay, I am doing wrong. You start questioning yourself over there. So it's like that you become so perfect in masking that now you don't even know how to unmask yourself. So if you're a therapist, you know that we have a double burden on ourselves, that how we are going to unmask ourselves, and how we are going to teach that to our people we are working with. And I'm talking about especially girls, because they're very mature, and the question they're asking and the way they are asking the question from the society, to be very honest, sometimes I don't have answer for those, because she's right over there. She said that, okay, uh, if a girl's education is important, why people are not working on girl education? So, and there are so many other things too. I just give you an example. How could we do that? How could we unmask ourselves, you know in a place where we are not welcome, when people don't understand us, or when you are a woman in the Asian culture, that you have to look for so many things, you have to socialize so much, and you have to say hello to everyone, be nice to everyone, uh, talk to everyone. And this is the way that, if you look toward our social culture, I think that is a difficult question. How can we unmask ourselves then? That
Yeah,
if
that
you
is
don't
very
want to,
difficult.
don't have the energy to do that, we don't
And
have
of course,
energy.
nobody can
For
be
example, I don't have
forced
energy to
to
talk.
unmask.
That is the
No,
point.
nobody can. I'm sorry. I think we're freezing on each other, Anila. Nobody can force anybody else to unmask. Nobody should force anybody else to unmask. But I completely see what you're saying. In your culture, particularly, it is really difficult because you feel like, I mean, every culture has social rules, but perhaps yours are stronger. And it's really, really difficult for women, particularly, to unmask in that culture. And I think nobody is going to unmask where they don't feel safe. That's the point, is you masked because you felt like you had to fit in. And therefore, if you still don't feel safe, you're not going to be able to unmask. And so for our young autistic girls, for example, it's most likely that they will feel safest starting to unmask at home. And so after they have been recognized or diagnosed as autistic, it's quite likely that you might see them gradually starting to change behavior at home. They might become really quite different at home, and that's a good thing, because they're starting to drop the mask, and that's absolutely what they should be able to feel safe to
Sorry,
do so.
let me cut you. I'm from Pakistan. Over here, girls don't come to us. Boy would come to us. Girl, if she is quiet, she's a very good girl. So it's not the culture that if you have some certain kind of, for example, it is autism or it is ADHD, they're not going to understand that. They will still see you. Even I am working with a girl and her mother is someone who is running a school with special needs, and she don't understand that her own daughter is taking therapy in hiding. She cannot tell her mother that, mother, I have ADHD. She's saying that, mother, I have IBS and I have anxiety, I'm taking therapy. So she cannot even, we are not safe to unmask ourselves in our homes, let alone the society. So sometimes it is very difficult for us to, and I also find it very difficult sometimes. Like I was in a place where that was a peer-to-peer group, and the person asked me that you don't need to do that. Don't become a therapist over here. I said that you don't get this idea that I need to mask myself over here again, because I don't find a way to talk to people. How I can talk to them? This is the only thing I'm good in. You know, that is my only strength, you could say. It's not my only strength, but I'm good in that, and that is the only way I can talk to people. I don't have other thing to talk. I don't have fashion to talk to them. I cannot talk to them the drama they are watching. Maybe there are few movies, but they don't know those movies. So there's a big struggle going on, and I very much and like you said, that we have to do so many awareness, and we know nothing about anything. Like autism criteria, I say the boy criteria for boy. We don't have a criteria for girl.
Absolutely. That's a different conversation though. We're not going to get onto that now.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so I can see some more questions, so I'm going to move on. Somebody's asking, your daughter would like to meet other autistic people, but how is it best to support this? It's difficult because there are not that many good groups. So there may be a group around you. Do you say where that you are? You're in Northumberland. There might be a good group if you follow Kieran, the autistic advocate. If you follow his page, you might find a good group that's, I don't know how far away from you it will be though, because my geography is not my strong point. We don't have any groups in that area. We might at some point. And somebody's put there's a group there for Toby Henderson Trust, so hopefully that might work for you. Okay, right, I promised my daughter that I would go back to her, so I am going to finish now because she's not feeling very well. So I'm going to finish now. If you do have any more questions, you can get hold of me on any of our social media channels. So I hope that it has been useful for some of you. Well, I hope it's been useful for all of you, but I hope you have enjoyed it. And I will see you all on social media later. Okay, and have a lovely Christmas, everyone. And I do want to say thank you to my fellow people who are on the front page of my book, to Eliza Fricker, who runs Missing the Mark, who did the illustrations for the book, and for Emily, who you might know better on Twitter as It's Emily Katie. She wrote the introduction for my book because she is an autistic young person, and she has been nurtured by her lovely family. So thank you all for coming, and have a lovely Christmas and New Year. Bye.